The dust storm hit harder than expected. Tommy Reed pulled his bandana over his nose and mouth, squinting through the brown clouds that swallowed the desert horizon. His horse struggled against the wind, and he knew they needed shelter fast. Up ahead, through the swirling dust, he spotted the outline of an old homestead. The roof was half collapsed, and the walls leaned like they might give up any second. But it was better than nothing. Tommy guided his horse toward the building, dismounting quickly and tying the reins to a broken fence post. The front door hung crooked on one hinge. He pushed it open with his shoulder, and it scraped against the dirt floor. Inside, the air was thick and stale. Sunlight fought its way through cracks in the walls, creating streaks of light in the dusty darkness. Tommy took a few steps inside, letting his eyes adjust. That's when he saw her. A woman was hanging from the ceiling beams. Her blonde hair covered most of her face, and her arms were stretched above her head, tied with rope to the old wooden rafters. Her feet barely touched the ground. She wasn't moving. Tommy's heart jumped into his throat. He rushed forward, pulling out his knife. "Hey, can you hear me?" He called out, but there was no response. He cut through the rope as fast as he could, catching her weight as she fell forward into his arms. She was light, too light. Her skin was pale and dry, her lips cracked. He laid her gently on the floor and checked for a pulse. It was there, weak but steady. She was alive. "Come on, wake up," Tommy said, patting her cheek gently. He grabbed his canteen and wet his bandana, dabbing it against her lips and forehead. After what felt like forever, she coughed. Her eyelids fluttered, and she took a gasping breath. "Easy now," Tommy said softly. "You're safe. Just breathe." Her eyes opened slowly. They were blue, scared, and confused. She looked at him like she didn't know where she was or how she got there. Then her gaze shifted to her wrists, red and raw from the rope, and something changed in her expression. Fear turned to panic. She tried to sit up too fast and nearly passed out again. Tommy steadied her. "Don't move too quick. You've been hanging there a while by the looks of it." The woman didn't say anything. She just stared at him, breathing hard, her whole body trembling. Tommy gave her small sips of water from his canteen. She drank like she hadn't seen water in days. While she recovered, Tommy looked around the room. The place had been abandoned for years, but someone had been here recently. There were fresh boot prints in the dust, and in the center of the room he noticed something strange. A pile of ash sat on the floor, surrounded by a circle of dirt that had been swept clean. Tommy walked over and knelt down, examining it closely. Mixed in with the ash were bits of paper that hadn't burned completely. He picked up one of the larger pieces. The paper was good quality, expensive even. On it, in beautiful handwriting, he could make out a few words. "My dearest and Apache lover." Tommy frowned. He sifted through more of the ash and found other fragments. They were all letters, or what was left of them. Someone had burned a whole stack of them right here on this floor. He looked back at the woman. She was watching him now, her eyes fixed on the pile of ash. Fresh tears ran down her cheeks, cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. "Did you burn these?" Tommy asked gently. She shook her head, then nodded, then looked away. It was clear she didn't want to talk about it. Tommy stood up and brushed the ash from his hands. Outside, the wind was still howling, but it sounded like the worst of the storm was passing. He walked back to the woman and offered his hand. "Can you stand? We need to get out of here. This place isn't safe." She hesitated, looking at his hand like it might be a trap. But then she took it, and he helped her to her feet. She swayed a bit, unsteady, but she managed to stay upright. "My name's Tommy," he said. "Tommy Reed. I've got a small place about 2 hours' ride from here. You can rest there, get some food in you." The woman opened her mouth like she was going to speak, but no words came out. She just nodded. Tommy went outside and brought his horse closer to the door. The storm had died down enough that they could travel. He helped the woman onto the horse first, then climbed up behind her. She leaned back against him, too exhausted to sit up straight on her own. As they rode away from the abandoned homestead, Tommy kept thinking about those burned letters and the words "Apache lover." He thought about the rope marks on her wrists and the way she'd been left hanging there. Alone in the middle of nowhere, someone had done this to her. Someone had tied her up, made her burn those letters, and left her to die. The question was why. And more importantly, who? Tommy looked down at the woman slumped against him. She'd closed her eyes, but he could tell she wasn't sleeping. She was just trying to block everything out. "You're safe now," he said quietly, though he wasn't sure if that was true. He didn't know what kind of trouble she was in, but he had a feeling it was the kind that didn't just go away. When they finally reached his ranch, The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of orange and red. Tommy's place was small, just a single-room cabin with a barn and a corral for the horses. But it was home and it was safe. He helped the woman down and led her inside. She stood in the middle of the room looking lost, like she didn't know what to do with herself. "There's a bed over there," Tommy said, pointing to the corner. "You should rest. I'll make some food." She walked to the bed like she was in a dream and sat down on the edge. Tommy busied himself lighting the stove and putting a pot of stew on to heat. He kept glancing over at her, but she just sat there staring at her hands. After a while, he brought her a bowl of warm stew and a cup of water. She ate slowly, mechanically, like she didn't really taste it. When she finished, she handed the bowl back to him and finally spoke. Her voice was hoarse and barely above a whisper. "Thank you." Those were the only words she said that night. But Tommy heard a world of pain in them. He made himself a bed on the floor and gave her the only mattress. As he lay there in the dark, listening to her breathe, he knew his life had just gotten a whole lot more complicated, but he also knew he couldn't turn his back on her. Whatever had happened in that abandoned house, whatever those burned letters meant, this woman needed help. And Tommy Reed had never been the kind of man to walk away from someone in need. 3 days passed and the woman still hadn't told Tommy her name. She moved around the cabin like a ghost, quiet and careful, never making eye contact for more than a second. Every morning she'd wake up before him and sit on the porch, staring out at the empty desert. Tommy tried not to push her. He'd seen broken people before and he knew they needed time. But the questions kept piling up in his mind, and the mystery of those burned letters ate at him. On the first morning he'd brought her breakfast, eggs and bread he'd made himself. She thanked him quietly and ate in small bites. When he suggested maybe they should get her to a doctor in town, she'd gone rigid, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. "No," she'd said firmly. It was the first real word she'd spoken since that first night. "No doctor. No town, please." The fear in her eyes was so raw that Tommy had backed off immediately. "Okay," he'd said. "No doctor. But if you're hurt, if you need help, I just need time," she'd whispered. Just time. So Tommy gave her time. He went about his daily work, tending to his small herd of cattle, fixing fence posts, and checking his water supply. The woman helped where she could, washing dishes, sweeping the floor, folding blankets. She moved carefully like someone who was used to being watched. Tommy noticed other things too. She jumped whenever he came through the door too quickly. If he raised his voice, even just to call the horses, she'd flinch. And at night, he heard her crying softly, trying to muffle the sound with his pillow. On the second day, Tommy was fixing a broken gate when he saw her standing by the corral, watching one of his horses. It was a gentle mare, old and calm. The woman reached out slowly and touched the horse's nose. The mare nickered softly and nuzzled her hand. For the first time since he'd found her, Tommy saw something other than fear on her face. There was a hint of a smile just for a moment. Then it was gone. That evening, as they sat eating dinner in silence, Tommy decided to try a different approach. Instead of asking her questions, he started talking about himself. Nothing heavy, just stories from his life. "This ranch belonged to my uncle," he said. "He raised me after my folks died, taught me everything about horses and cattle. He passed 5 years ago and left me this place. It's not much, but it's honest work." The woman listened but didn't respond. Tommy continued. "I don't get many visitors out here. Nearest town is half a day's ride. Most people think I'm crazy for living this far out, but I like the quiet. Got tired of people and their problems a long time ago." He paused, then added, "Though I suppose problems find you no matter where you hide, don't they?" The woman looked up at him, then really looked at him. Her eyes were searching his face, trying to figure out if she could trust him. Tommy held her gaze steadily, letting her see he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly. "And I'm not going to make you do anything you don't want to do. But if you're in trouble, if someone's looking for you, I should know. This is my home and I need to know what I'm dealing with." She looked down at her plate. For a long moment, Tommy thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she spoke, her voice barely audible. "They'll kill me if they find me." The words hung in the air between them. Tommy felt his stomach tighten. "Who will?" But she shook her head and stood up, taking her plate to the basin. The conversation was over. On the third day, Tommy rode out to check his far pasture. When he came back in the afternoon, he found the woman sitting on the floor near the fireplace. She was holding something in her hands, turning it over and over. It was one of the burned paper fragments from the abandoned house. Tommy realized she must have taken it before they left. The piece was small, no bigger than his thumb, with just a few words visible. Forever yours. She looked up when Tommy entered, quickly trying to hide the paper. But he'd already seen it. Those letters, Tommy said carefully, pulling off his hat and hanging it on the peg by the door. They meant something to you. She nodded slowly, tears starting to form in her eyes. The person who wrote them, Tommy continued, sitting down on a chair near her but not too close. Are they the reason you're in trouble? Another nod. The tears spilled over now, running down her cheeks. Do they know what happened to you? Do they know you're missing? She shook her head this time and a sob escaped her throat. He thinks I left him, she whispered. He thinks I chose someone else. Tommy leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. What's your name? She looked at him for a long moment, weighing whether to trust him with even this small piece of information. Finally, she spoke. Catherine, she said. My name is Catherine Miller. Okay, Catherine, Tommy said gently. You don't have to tell me everything right now, but I need to know one thing. Are the people who did this to you going to come looking here? Am I putting myself in danger by helping you? Catherine's eyes widened and fresh fear crossed her face. No, she said quickly. They don't know about you. They left me there to die. They think I'm already gone. Tommy absorbed this information. Someone had tried to kill her, left her hanging in that abandoned house and assumed nature would finish the job. But why? What had she done to deserve that? The letters you burned, Tommy said. Someone made you burn them, didn't they? That wasn't your choice. Catherine nodded, clutching the tiny paper fragment like it was the most precious thing in the world. They made me watch them burn, she whispered. Every single one. Years of letters. Years of love. They made me put them in the fire myself while they watched and laughed. The bitterness in her voice cut through Tommy like a knife. He could only imagine how cruel that must have been to destroy something so personal, so meaningful. Who were they? Tommy asked, but Catherine shook her head again. I can't, she said. If I tell you, you'll be in danger too. It's better if you don't know, Tommy sighed. He understood her fear, but the not knowing made everything harder. Still, he wouldn't force her. Not yet, all right, he said, standing up. But Catherine, you can't hide forever. Whatever happened, whoever did this, they're not going to just disappear. Eventually, you'll have to face it. I know, she said quietly. I know. That night, Tommy lay awake on his makeshift bed on the floor, thinking about everything Catherine had said and everything she hadn't. Someone had tortured her, not with physical pain, but with something worse. They'd destroyed her memories, her love letters, her connection to someone she cared about deeply. And then they'd left her to die alone. What kind of person did that? What kind of hatred drove someone to be that cruel? Tommy didn't have answers, but he knew one thing for certain. Catherine Miller was in serious trouble, and the silence she was keeping was going to break eventually. The question was whether it would break before her enemies found her, or after. The fourth night changed everything. Tommy woke up to the sound of someone crying, not the quiet, muffled sobs he'd heard before, but deep, broken crying that came from somewhere dark inside. He sat up and saw Catherine curled up on the bed, her whole body shaking. Without thinking, he got up and lit a candle, bringing it closer so she could see him in the darkness. Catherine, he said softly, what's wrong? She looked up at him, her face wet with tears, and something in her seemed to crack open. All the fear and pain she'd been holding back for days came pouring out. I can't do this anymore, she sobbed. I can't keep running. I can't keep hiding. I just want it to be over. Tommy sat down on the edge of the bed, keeping a respectful distance. Then stop running, he said. Tell me what happened. Let me help you. Catherine shook her head, but the words started coming anyway, like water through a broken dam. I was supposed to get married, she said, her voice shaking. 3 weeks ago. To a man named Robert Whitmore. His family owns half the county. They're rich, powerful. My father works for his father, managing their ranch. The wedding was supposed to be the biggest event of the year. She paused, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. But I didn't love Robert. I never did. He was cold, controlling. He wanted a wife who would look pretty at parties and keep her mouth shut. That's not who I am. Tommy listened without interrupting, sensing there was much more to come. 6 months before the wedding, a man came to work on my father's property, Catherine continued. His name was Joseph Redbird. He was Apache, worked as a translator and guide for travelers passing through. My father hired him to help with some business dealings with the local tribes. Her voice softened when she said his name, and Tommy understood immediately. I wasn't supposed to talk to him, Catherine said. My father made that clear. But Joseph was different from anyone I'd ever met. He was kind, intelligent, and he saw me. Really saw me. Not as Robert's future wife or my father's daughter, but as myself. You fell in love with him, Tommy said quietly. Catherine nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. We tried to fight it. We both knew how impossible it was. But we couldn't stay away from each other. We started meeting in secret just to talk at first. He told me about his people, his culture, his dreams. I told him about the books I'd read, the places I wanted to see, the life I wanted to live. She clutched the small burned paper fragment she still carried. And we wrote letters. So many letters. Whenever we couldn't meet, we'd leave notes for each other. Joseph would sign his Apache lover because he said that's how the world saw him. But I saw so much more. Tommy could picture it now. 2 people from different worlds finding something real in a place that would never accept them. We planned to run away, Catherine said. 2 weeks before my wedding to Robert, we were going to leave together. Head west, somewhere no one knew us, where we could start over. Joseph had family in California who would take us in. What happened? Tommy asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew. Catherine's face hardened, anger mixing with the grief. Robert found the letters. I don't know how. Maybe he'd been having me watched. Maybe someone saw us together. But 3 weeks ago, 2 days before we were supposed to run, Robert showed up at my father's house with 4 of his men. She closed her eyes, reliving the memory. They dragged me out of bed in the middle of the night. Took me to that abandoned house you found me in. Robert was so calm about it, so cold. He laid out all my letters on the floor, every single one I'd saved. There must have been 50 of them. Tommy felt his jaw tighten with anger, but he stayed quiet. Robert said I'd humiliated him, Catherine continued, that I'd made him look like a fool. He said everyone would know what I'd done, how I'd betrayed him with an Indian. He said he couldn't let that stand. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. He made me burn them, one by one. His men held me while Robert put each letter in my hand and made me throw it in the fire. He wanted me to watch them burn, wanted me to see every word disappear. Tommy could barely control his rage. The cruelty of it was beyond anything he'd imagined. When the last letter was ashes, Robert tied me to those ceiling beams, Catherine said. He told me this was mercy. He said he could have killed me, could have killed Joseph. But instead he was giving us both a chance to live if we stayed away from each other. He left you there to die, Tommy said flatly. He said if I survived, I'd be too broken to cause any more trouble. And if I didn't, she shrugged, then the problem would solve itself. Before he left, he told me that Joseph was already gone. Said his men had run him out of town, told him I'd chosen Robert, that I never wanted to see him again. That's a lie, Tommy said. I know, Catherine sobbed. But Joseph doesn't. He thinks I abandoned him. Thinks I chose my comfortable life over our love, and I have no way to find him, no way to tell him the truth. She looked at Tommy with desperate eyes. Robert said if I ever tried to contact Joseph, if I ever told anyone what really happened, he'd kill us both. His family has enough money and power to make it happen. They could make it look like an accident or blame it on bandits or just make us disappear. No one would question them. Tommy stood up and paced the small cabin, his mind racing. This was worse than he'd thought. Catherine wasn't just running from an angry ex. She was up against a powerful family that had already proven they'd go to extreme lengths to protect their reputation. Where do you think Joseph is now? Tommy asked. Catherine shook her head. I don't know. Robert's men could have taken him anywhere. He could be halfway across the country by now, or... She couldn't finish the sentence. You think they might have killed him? I don't know, she whispered. I pray every day that they just scared him off, that he's alive somewhere, safe. But I don't know. Tommy sat back down, thinking hard. Catherine, we can't just let this stand. What Robert did to you, what his family did, it's not right. There has to be some kind of justice. Justice? Catherine laughed bitterly. The Whitmores own the law in 3 counties. Robert's father is friends with the territorial governor. Who's going to believe a ranch manager's daughter over them? Who's going to care about an Apache translator who nobody can find? She had a point, but Tommy wasn't ready to give up. So what are you going to do? Hide out here forever? Live your life looking over your shoulder? I don't know, Catherine admitted. I just know I can't face them, not yet. Maybe not ever. They sat in silence for a while, the candle flickering between them. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance. I want to find him, Catherine finally said. I want to find Joseph and tell him the truth. Even if we can never be together, even if it's too dangerous, I need him to know I didn't abandon him. That I loved him. That I still love him. Tommy looked at her determined face, saw the fire behind the fear, and made a decision. Then we'll find him, he said. Catherine's eyes widened. What? No, Tommy, you can't get involved. This isn't your fight. You're under my roof, Tommy said firmly. That makes it my fight. Besides, I never liked bullies, and from what you've told me, the Whitmores are the worst kind. They'll kill you, Catherine warned. They can try, Tommy replied. But I've survived worse than rich men with mean streaks. And I know people, Catherine. People who can help us track down Joseph. People who owe me favors. For the first time since he'd found her, Catherine smiled. It was small and uncertain, but it was real. Why are you doing this? She asked. Tommy thought about it for a moment. Because it's the right thing to do, he said simply. And because everyone deserves a chance to tell their truth, even when powerful people try to silence them. Catherine reached out and squeezed his hand. Thank you, she whispered. Tommy squeezed back. Don't thank me yet. We've got a long road ahead of us and it's not going to be easy. But as he looked at Catherine's grateful face, Tommy knew he'd made the right choice. Whatever came next, wherever this journey took them, they'd face it together. The hunt for Joseph Redbird was about to begin. The next morning, Tommy saddled up both horses before dawn. Catherine watched from the porch, wrapped in a blanket against the cool desert air. She looked stronger today, like confessing her story had lifted some of the weight off her shoulders. Where are we going? She asked as Tommy checked the saddle straps. To see an old friend, Tommy replied. His name's Benjamin Cross. Used to be a scout for the army. Knows every Apache settlement and trading post from here to New Mexico. If anyone can help us track down Joseph, it's him. Catherine nodded, but Tommy could see the worry in her eyes. What if Robert finds out we're looking? What if his men are watching? That's why we're leaving before sunrise, Tommy said. And why we're taking the long way through the canyon. Nobody uses that route except smugglers and people who don't want to be found. They rode out as the first hint of light touched the eastern horizon. Catherine was quiet for most of the journey, but Tommy noticed her constantly scanning the landscape, jumping at every sound. The fear the Whitmores had planted in her ran deep. It took them most of the day to reach Benjamin's place, a small adobe house built into the side of a rocky hill. Smoke rose from the chimney and 3 dogs came running out to greet them. Barking but friendly. Benjamin himself appeared in the doorway, a tall man with silver hair and a weathered face that had seen too much sun. His eyes narrowed when he saw Tommy, then widened in surprise. Tommy Reed, he called out. Haven't seen you in 2 years. Thought maybe you'd finally gotten yourself killed. Not yet, Tommy said, climbing down from his horse. He helped Catherine down and led her toward the house. Ben, this is Catherine. We need your help. Benjamin studied Catherine for a long moment, taking in her nervous demeanor and the fading rope burns on her wrists. He'd been around long enough to recognize trouble when he saw it. Come inside, he said simply. Tell me everything. Over coffee and cornbread, Tommy and Catherine laid out the whole story. Benjamin listened without interrupting, his face growing darker as they described what Robert Whitmore had done. When they finished, Benjamin leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. The Whitmores, he said with disgust. I know that family. Robert's father, Charles Whitmore, has been causing problems with the Apache tribes for years, trying to push them off their land, bribing officials, starting conflicts so he can grab more territory. Do you know Joseph Redbird? Catherine asked hopefully. Benjamin nodded slowly. I know of him. Good man, honest. He was working hard to keep peace between his people and the settlers. A lot of folks didn't like that, especially people like the Whitmores who profit from conflict. Do you know where he is? Catherine leaned forward, desperate. Benjamin's expression turned grim. I heard something about 3 weeks ago. Word travels through the Apache communities. There was talk of a translator who got forced onto a train heading east. Some ranch hands were bragging about it in a saloon in Tucson. Said they'd been paid good money to make sure an Indian troublemaker disappeared. Catherine's face went pale. East? Where east? That's what I've been trying to figure out, Benjamin said. But I think I know. There's been talk of the government relocating more Apache people to Oklahoma territory, rounding up anyone they can find and shipping them out. The Whitmores have connections in Washington. Would be easy for them to get Joseph's name added to a relocation list. So he's in Oklahoma? Tommy asked. Maybe. Or maybe he got off the train somewhere between here and there. But if he made it all the way, he'd be at one of the reservation camps. Could be Fort Sill, could be one of the smaller settlements. Catherine stood up, pacing the small room. Then we go to Oklahoma. We search every camp until we find him. Hold on, Benjamin said. It's not that simple. Those reservation camps are guarded. They don't just let anyone walk in asking questions. And if the Whitmores have people watching for you, showing up at a government camp is a good way to get caught. I don't care, Catherine said fiercely. I have to find him. Benjamin looked at Tommy. You know what you're getting into here? The Whitmores won't take kindly to you helping her. They've got enough money to hire the best guns in the territory. I know, Tommy said. But we can't just leave Joseph thinking Catherine abandoned him. And we can't let the Whitmores get away with what they did. Benjamin studied them both for a long moment, then sighed. All right, I'll help you. But we do this smart. We gather information first, make a plan, don't go charging in blind. Over the next few hours, Benjamin laid out what he knew. He had contacts in the Apache communities, people who owed him favors from his scouting days. He could send messages, ask questions, try to track down Joseph's exact location without raising too much attention. But you need to understand something, Benjamin warned. Even if we find Joseph, even if you get to tell him the truth, that doesn't solve your real problem. The Whitmores are still out there. Robert still has power and money and men willing to do whatever he asks. I know, Catherine said quietly. But first things first. I need to find Joseph. Then we can figure out the rest. As evening fell, Benjamin made them dinner and gave them a place to sleep. But Catherine couldn't rest. She stood outside under the stars, looking east, as if she could somehow see all the way to Oklahoma. Tommy joined her after a while. You okay? I keep thinking about what they must have told him, Catherine said. The lies they fed him to make him leave. Did they threaten him, hurt him, or did they just convince him I never cared? Joseph knew you loved him, Tommy said. One conversation doesn't erase what you had, doesn't it? Catherine turned to face him. Think about it from his side, Tommy. We were planning to run away together to start a new life. Then suddenly, days before we're supposed to leave, men show up and tell him I've changed my mind, that I'm marrying Robert after all. How would that feel? What would you believe? Tommy didn't have a good answer for that. Catherine continued, her voice breaking. The worst part is they were so calculated about it. Robert didn't just want to stop us from being together. He wanted to destroy what we had. Burning the letters wasn't enough. He had to make Joseph think I never loved him at all. That's the real betrayal. We'll make it right, Tommy promised. We'll find him and tell him the truth. And if he doesn't believe me, if the hurt is too deep, then at least he'll know you tried. At least he'll know you didn't give up on him. They stood in silence for a while, watching the stars. Finally, Catherine spoke again. There's something else I haven't told you, she said quietly. The night Robert's men took me before they dragged me to that house, they said something. One of them was laughing about how they'd handled Joseph. He said, that Indian won't be causing problems anymore. Boss made sure of that. Tommy felt a chill run down his spine. What do you think he meant? I don't know, Catherine whispered. But I'm scared, Tommy. What if they didn't just relocate him? What if they hurt him? What if... She couldn't finish. Don't think like that, Tommy said firmly. Benjamin said he heard about a translator being put on a train. That means Joseph was alive. We have to believe he still is. But even as he said it, Tommy felt the weight of uncertainty. The Whitmores had already proven they were capable of terrible cruelty. Who knew how far they'd been willing to go? That night, Tommy lay awake thinking about the journey ahead. Oklahoma was weeks away by horse, and every mile would be dangerous. The Whitmores might have people looking for Catherine. Robert might have friends in the army or the territorial government who'd alert him if someone started asking questions about an Apache translator. And even if they made it to Oklahoma safely, even if they found Joseph alive and well, there was no guarantee he'd want to see Catherine. The wound of betrayal, even a false one, could run deep. Some hurts didn't heal just because the truth came out. But as he looked over at Catherine, sleeping fitfully on Benjamin's spare cot, Tommy knew they had to try. She deserved that much. Joseph deserved to know the truth, and the Whitmores deserved to face consequences for what they'd done. The next morning, Benjamin woke them before dawn. "I sent messages last night," he said. "Called in some favors. Should start hearing back in a few days. In the meantime, you two need to stay out of sight. If the Whitmores get wind that Catherine's alive and asking questions, they'll come after all of us." "How long do we wait?" Catherine asked. "As long as it takes to do this right," Benjamin replied. "Patience might save your lives." But patience was hard when every day meant Joseph was further away, believing a lie that had broken both their hearts. The betrayal wasn't just what Robert had done to Catherine. It was what he'd done to Joseph, planting poison in his mind, making him doubt the one real thing he'd ever had. And somehow, they had to find a way to heal that wound before it became permanent. 5 days of waiting felt like 5 years. Catherine paced Benjamin's small house like a caged animal, jumping every time a horse passed on the distant road. Tommy tried to keep her calm, but he understood her frustration. Every hour that passed was another hour Joseph spent believing a lie. On the 6th day, Benjamin's contact finally arrived. His name was Henry, an Apache man in his 50s who'd known Benjamin for decades. He rode in just after sunset, looking tired but bringing news. "Found something," Henry said, accepting a cup of water from Benjamin. "Asked around the communities, quiet like you said. There was a Joseph Redbird working as a translator near Tucson 6 months ago. Good reputation. Then about 3 weeks back he disappeared." Catherine stepped forward. "Disappeared how?" Henry looked at her with sympathetic eyes. "Some ranch hands came looking for him. Told folks there'd been trouble, that he needed to leave for his own safety. Said a white woman he'd been involved with had gotten him in hot water with her family. Made it sound like he was lucky to escape with his life." "That's the lie," Catherine said bitterly. "They wanted him to think I'd caused him trouble. Worse than that," Henry continued. "They took him to the train station in Tucson. Bought him a ticket east and made sure he got on the train. Told him if he ever came back this way, the woman's family would have him killed." Tommy clenched his fists. The Whitmores hadn't just separated them. They'd made Joseph feel like running was the only way to survive. "Where was the train going?" Benjamin asked. "Fort Smith, Arkansas, with connections to Oklahoma Territory. The ranch hands made sure everyone at the station knew Joseph was being relocated. Kept calling him a troublemaker who needed to be sent away." Henry shook his head in disgust. They were making a show of it, humiliating him. Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. "Is he still alive? Did anyone see him reach his destination?" "That's where the trail goes cold," Henry admitted. "I got word from contacts along the rail line. Someone matching Joseph's description was seen getting off the train in Veneta, a small town in Oklahoma. That was about 2 weeks ago." "After that, nothing." "Veneta," Benjamin repeated, walking to a map on his wall. He pointed to a spot in northeastern Oklahoma Territory. "That's Cherokee Nation land near the Kansas border. Long way from Apache territory. Why would he get off there?" Tommy wondered aloud. Henry had a theory. Could be he didn't have enough money to go further. Could be he was looking for work. Or maybe he was trying to disappear, start over somewhere nobody knew him. Catherine moved to the map, tracing the route with her finger. "How far is Veneta from here?" "About 500 miles, Benjamin said. 2 weeks hard riding if the weather holds. 3 if you run into trouble." "Then we leave tomorrow," Catherine said firmly. Benjamin held up his hand. "Hold on. You can't just ride into Cherokee Nation asking questions about a missing Apache man. People are suspicious of outsiders, especially after everything the government's been doing to the tribes." "You need someone who can vouch for you," Henry spoke up. "I can give you names. People who might help if you mention my name, but you need to be careful. The Whitmores have long reach, and if they figure out you're tracking Joseph, they'll be waiting for you." "Let them wait," Catherine said with surprising strength. "I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of being afraid." Tommy saw the change in her. The broken woman he'd found hanging in that abandoned house was gone. In her place was someone determined to fight back, to reclaim what had been stolen from her. They spent the evening planning. Benjamin gave them supplies, maps, and a list of contacts along the way. Henry provided letters of introduction to people in the Apache and Cherokee communities who might help them. "One more thing," Henry said before he left. "There's talk in the Apache communities about what the Whitmores did to Joseph. People are angry about it. If you find him, you'll have more friends than you know. That night, Tommy and Catherine prepared for the journey. They packed light, just enough for the road. Benjamin loaned them his best horses, animals that could cover long distances without tiring. "Why are you doing all this?" Catherine asked Benjamin as they loaded the saddlebags. "You barely know me. This isn't your fight." Benjamin looked at her with sad eyes. "I've seen what happens when powerful people think they can do whatever they want. I've watched innocent folks get crushed because nobody stood up for them. Maybe I can't fix everything that's wrong in this world, but I can help you. That's got to count for something." They left before dawn, heading northeast. The first few days were hard riding through open desert, always watching for anyone following them. Tommy kept them off the main roads, using cattle trails and dry riverbeds to cover their tracks. Catherine proved to be a better rider than Tommy expected. She kept up without complaint, even when they rode from sunrise to sunset. At night, they'd make small camps, keeping the fire low and taking turns on watch. On the fourth day, they reached a small trading post run by a man named Diego, one of Benjamin's contacts. Diego was suspicious at first, but when Tommy showed him Benjamin's letter, he relaxed. "You're looking for the Apache translator," Diego said. It wasn't a question. Word's already spreading. People want to know why. "We're friends," Tommy said carefully. "We heard he might be in trouble." Diego studied Catherine for a long moment. "You're the woman," he said. "The one they said chose money over love." Catherine flinched but held Diego's gaze. "That's the lie they told. I'm here to prove it's not true." Diego nodded slowly. "There's a man who came through here 8 days ago. Bought supplies, asked about work. He was Apache, about 30, quiet type. Wouldn't give his name, but he had the look of someone running from something." "Which way did he go?" Catherine asked eagerly. "North toward Veneta. Said he heard there was work at a trading post there, helping with the Cherokee trade routes." Diego paused. "But I heard something else too. 2 men came through here 3 days later, asking about the same person. They weren't friendly types. Had guns, mean eyes. They showed people a drawing, asked if anyone had seen him." Tommy's stomach tightened. "Whitmore's men?" "Could be. They didn't say who they worked for, but they had money. Offered gold for information about the Apache man's whereabouts. Did anyone tell them?" Catherine's voice was tight with fear. "Not from me," Diego said. "But I can't speak for everyone. Money talks loud out here." They pushed harder after that, knowing the Whitmores might be ahead of them. Every town they passed through, Tommy asked careful questions. Catherine stayed quiet, keeping her face covered with a scarf to avoid recognition. They heard more stories. Joseph had been seen in several places, always moving, always looking over his shoulder. He was using a different name now, calling himself John Running. He took odd jobs, never staying more than a few days in one place. "He's running scared," Tommy said one night as they camped under the stars. "He really believes they'll kill him if he stays in one place too long." "It's my fault," Catherine said miserably. "If I'd been stronger, if I'd fought back harder against Robert, none of this would have happened." "Don't do that," Tommy said firmly. "You were tied up and threatened. You did what you had to do to survive. This is on the Whitmores, not you." 2 weeks into their journey, they finally reached Veneta. It was a bustling town, bigger than Tommy expected, with Cherokee families mixing with white settlers and traders from all over. The main street had a general store, a hotel, and a trading post that seemed to be the center of activity. Tommy approached the trading post carefully, with Catherine waiting outside. The owner was a Cherokee woman named Ruth who looked at him with sharp, intelligent eyes. "I'm looking for a friend," Tommy said, showing her Henry's letter of introduction. "An Apache man who might have come through here. Goes by John Running now." Ruth's expression didn't change. "Why you looking?" "He's in danger. There are men after him. We're trying to warn him." "Who's we?" Ruth glanced toward the door where Catherine waited. Tommy made a decision. Sometimes the truth was the only way forward. "The woman he loves. She's been looking for him to tell him the truth about what happened." Ruth studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "He was here. Worked for me for 4 days, loading wagons and organizing supplies. Good worker, quiet. But he left yesterday morning. Said he had to keep moving." Catherine had come inside now, unable to wait any longer. "Please," she said to Ruth, "do you know where he went?" Ruth looked at Catherine with something like pity. "He went to a settlement about 20 miles west. Place called Cedar Creek. Has a small Apache community there, people who've been pushed off their land. He said he might find work there, maybe find some peace." Thank you, Catherine breathed. But you should know, Ruth added, her voice grave. Those two men who've been asking around? They were here yesterday afternoon, just hours after he left. They're headed to Cedar Creek, too. If you're going after him, you better move fast. Tommy and Catherine ran for their horses. 20 miles. They could make it by nightfall if they rode hard. But the Whitmore's men had a head start. As they raced out of town, Catherine shouted over the wind, "What if we're too late?" "What if they find him first?" "Then we make sure they don't hurt him," Tommy shouted back. But both of them knew that might not be a promise they could keep. After all this time, after all this distance. The sun was setting as Tommy and Catherine rode into Cedar Creek. It wasn't much of a settlement, just a handful of buildings clustered around a creek bed, with several tents and simple shelters spreading out into the surrounding trees. Smoke rose from cooking fires and people moved about quietly, going about their evening routines. Tommy slowed their horses to a walk, not wanting to cause alarm. A few faces turned their way, expressions wary. Strangers weren't always welcome, especially in a place where people had been pushed to the margins. An older Apache man stepped forward, holding up his hand. "State your business," he said in accented but clear English. Tommy dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. "We're looking for someone, a friend. We mean no harm." "Everyone who comes here is looking for someone," the man said, "and everyone says they mean no harm." "Words are cheap." Catherine climbed down from her horse, pulling off her scarf. "Please, his name is Joseph Redbird, or he might be calling himself John Running. I've traveled 2 weeks to find him. I just need to talk to him." The old man's eyes narrowed. "Why would a white woman travel 2 weeks to talk to an Apache man she calls a friend?" "Because I love him," Catherine said simply, "and because he thinks I betrayed him, but it's not true. Someone lied to him. I need him to know the truth." The old man studied her face for a long moment. Whatever he saw there must have convinced him, because his expression softened slightly. "There is a man here who matches that name. He came 2 days ago, but he's been hurt." Catherine's face went pale. "Hurt? How?" "2 men came yesterday. They said they just wanted to talk to him, but their eyes told a different story. John tried to run and they caught him. Beat him pretty bad before some of us stepped in and chased them off." Tommy cursed under his breath. "The Whitmore's men had found Joseph first. Where is he now?" Catherine asked desperately. The old man pointed to a small cabin at the edge of the settlement. "My daughter is caring for him. Come, but know this, if you mean him more harm, you'll answer to all of us." They followed him to the cabin. Inside, the light was dim, and the smell of medicinal herbs filled the air. A young woman was kneeling beside a cot where a man lay, applying something to wounds on his face. Even in the poor light, even with his face swollen and bruised, Catherine recognized him immediately. "Joseph," she whispered. The man on the cot went rigid. His eyes, one nearly swollen shut, turned toward the doorway where Catherine stood. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Joseph tried to sit up, groaning with the effort. "No," he said hoarsely. "Get her out of here. I don't want to see her." The words hit Catherine like a physical blow, but she didn't back away. "Joseph, please. Just listen to me." "Listen to what?" Joseph's voice was bitter despite the pain it clearly caused him to speak. "More lies? You made your choice, Catherine. You chose your safe life, your rich husband. What are you doing here? Come to make sure I'm really gone?" "That's not what happened," Catherine said, tears streaming down her face. "They lied to you, Joseph. I never chose Robert. I never wanted him." "Then why did his men tell me you did?" Joseph demanded. "Why did they say you were getting married in 3 days, that you told them to make me leave? Why didn't you come yourself if it wasn't true?" Catherine stepped further into the cabin and Tommy could see her shaking. "Because they tied me to a ceiling beam and left me to die," she said, her voice breaking. "Because Robert found our letters and made me burn every single one while his men held me down. Because they wanted to destroy us both and they almost did." Joseph stared at her, confusion replacing some of the anger on his battered face. "What?" "The night before you were taken away, Robert's men came for me," Catherine continued, the words pouring out now. "They dragged me to an abandoned house. Robert was there. He had all our letters, Joseph. Everyone I'd saved. He made me watch them burn. He said if I ever tried to find you, he'd kill us both." She held out the small burned fragment she'd carried all this way. "This is all I have left. The only piece of us they didn't completely destroy." Joseph looked at the tiny piece of paper, then back at Catherine. Tommy could see the war in his eyes, wanting to believe but afraid to hope. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Joseph asked quietly. "How do I know this isn't another trick?" Tommy stepped forward. "Because I found her hanging in that house 3 weeks ago, barely alive. Because she's been searching for you ever since, risking everything to find you. Because she still loves you, even after everything they did to break you both." The young woman who'd been tending Joseph's wounds spoke up. "The men who beat him yesterday, they said they were sending a message. They said if John didn't stay away from the Whitmore woman, next time they'd finish the job." Joseph's eyes widened. "They knew you were coming." "Of course they knew," Catherine said. "Robert has people watching, listening. But I don't care anymore, Joseph. I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of letting them control my life. They can threaten me, they can hurt me, but they can't make me stop loving you." For a long moment, Joseph just looked at her. Then slowly, painfully, he reached out his hand. Catherine rushed forward and took it, kneeling beside the cot. They held on to each other like drowning people finding solid ground. "I thought I'd lost you," Joseph whispered. "I thought you'd chosen the easy path, and I couldn't blame you. What kind of life could I offer you? A translator with nothing but the clothes on his back?" "The only life I want," Catherine said fiercely. "I don't care about money or comfort or what anyone thinks. I just want you." "They burned the letters," Joseph said, his voice hollow. "All those words, all those promises." "But they couldn't burn what we feel," Catherine replied. "The letters are gone, but we're still here. We're still alive. That has to count for something." Joseph pulled her closer, ignoring the pain it caused him. They held each other while tears flowed freely from both of them. Years of love and loss and longing finally finding release. The old man who'd brought them in cleared his throat gently. "You should know, those 2 men said they'd be back. They said their boss wants to make sure the problem is handled permanently." Tommy's jaw tightened. "Then we need to leave. Tonight if possible." "He can't travel yet," the young woman said. "Those men broke his ribs, maybe worse. Moving him too soon could cause serious damage." "If we stay, we're putting everyone here in danger," Catherine said, looking around at the people who'd given Joseph shelter. "Robert's men won't care who gets in their way." The old man shook his head. "We've been pushed around enough. First by the army, then by settlers stealing our land. We're not running anymore. If those men come back, they'll find we're not as easy to intimidate as they think." "I can't ask you to fight my battles," Joseph protested. "You're not asking. We're offering," the old man said firmly. "Besides, this isn't just your battle. It's about standing up to bullies who think money and guns give them the right to do whatever they want. That's everyone's battle." Tommy looked at the determined faces around him and felt a surge of respect. These people had every reason to walk away, to protect themselves first, but they were choosing to stand together instead. "What's your name?" Tommy asked the old man. "William Longfoot," he replied. "And I say we post guards tonight. If those men come back, we'll be ready." As the night deepened, the community gathered. William explained the situation, and one by one, people stepped forward to help. Some men took positions around the settlement with rifles. Others prepared supplies in case they needed to evacuate quickly. The women made sure everyone was fed, and that Joseph had everything he needed to rest and heal. Catherine never left Joseph's side. They talked in quiet voices, filling in the gaps of the 3 weeks they'd been apart. Joseph told her about the fear and confusion he'd felt, believing she'd abandoned him. Catherine described the horror of burning their letters, of hanging in that house waiting to die. "I should have come for you," Joseph said, guilt heavy in his voice. "I should have fought to find out the truth instead of just running." "They threatened to kill you," Catherine reminded him. "You were trying to stay alive." "That's not cowardice, Joseph. That's survival. What do we do now?" Joseph asked. "Even if we make it through tonight, the Whitmores aren't going to stop. They've proven they'll go to any lengths to keep us apart." Catherine was quiet for a moment, then spoke with conviction. "We stop running. We stop hiding. We find a way to expose what they did. Not just to us, but to anyone else they've hurt. People like Robert Whitmore get away with things because their victims are too scared to speak up." "But what if we're not scared anymore?" "They could kill us," Joseph said. "They could," Catherine agreed. "But isn't that better than living in fear for the rest of our lives? At least if we fight back, we have a chance. If we run, we'll always be looking over our shoulders." Tommy, who'd been standing guard near the door, spoke up. "She's right. Men like the Whitmores count on silence. They count on people being too afraid to challenge them. But if enough people stand together, if enough voices speak up, even the powerful can fall. Joseph looked at Catherine's determined face, then at Tommy, then at the people of Cedar Creek who'd chosen to stand with them. Something shifted in his expression. The fear that had been driving him for weeks began to transform into something else. Resolve. The attack came 3 nights later, just before dawn when most people were at their most vulnerable. Tommy was on watch when he heard the horses approaching, at least 6 riders moving fast toward the settlement. "Everyone up," he shouted. "They're coming!" The community sprang into action with practiced efficiency. Women and children moved to the safest buildings while men took defensive positions. Joseph, still recovering but insisting on helping, positioned himself near a window with a rifle William had given him. The riders came to a stop just outside the settlement, silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky. Tommy recognized the 2 who'd beaten Joseph, but there were 4 others with them now. All armed, all looking ready for violence. One man rode forward slightly, better dressed than the others. He had the confident bearing of someone used to giving orders. "We're looking for a woman named Catherine Miller," he called out, "and an Indian who goes by Joseph Redbird. Send them out and nobody else gets hurt." William Longfoot stepped into the open, his rifle held casually but ready. "This is a peaceful community. You have no authority here." "I have all the authority I need," the well-dressed man said, pulling back his coat to show a badge. "Deputy Territorial Marshal." "I'm here on official business." Tommy's stomach sank. The Whitmores had gotten someone from the law involved. That made everything more complicated. "What official business?" William demanded. "Catherine Miller is wanted for questioning in connection with assault charges filed by Robert Whitmore, and Joseph Redbird is being detained for violating relocation orders. Now send them out before this gets ugly." Catherine appeared in the doorway of the cabin, and Tommy tried to signal her to stay back, but she ignored him. "Those are lies," she called out. "Robert Whitmore kidnapped me, assaulted me, and left me to die. If anyone should be facing charges, it's him." The deputy smirked. "That's quite a story, Miss Miller. Unfortunately, Mr. Whitmore has already filed a sworn statement saying you attacked him when he tried to break off your engagement. He has witnesses." "Paid witnesses," Catherine shot back. "Men who work for his family. Nevertheless, you'll need to come with me to answer these charges." The deputy's tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Joseph appeared beside Catherine, moving stiffly but standing tall. "And what about me? What law did I break?" "You were ordered relocated to Oklahoma Territory and you left your designated area. That's a federal offense." The deputy's smile was cold. "Though between you and me, I think we can make these problems disappear if you just walk away from Miss Miller here. The Whitmores don't care about you specifically. They just want their family matter settled." "By family matter, you mean silencing the woman who knows what they really are," Tommy said, stepping forward. "How much did they pay you to come here?" The deputy's face hardened. "Careful, friend. Obstructing a marshal is a serious crime." "So is kidnapping and attempted murder," Tommy replied. "So is filing false charges. And I'm willing to bet a real marshal would be interested in hearing about all of it." "I am a real marshal," the deputy said, but something flickered in his eyes, doubt or maybe guilt. "Then show us your papers," William said. "Show us the official orders for this detention." The deputy reached for something in his coat, and for a moment Tommy thought he was going for his papers. Instead, he pulled out a gun. "I don't need papers. I've got 6 armed men and the law on my side. Now send those 2 out or we start shooting." The settlement went dead quiet. Everyone could see how this was going to end. The Whitmores had bought themselves a badge and some hired guns. They were going to take Catherine and Joseph by force and probably kill them once they were away from witnesses. But then something unexpected happened. A voice called out from the ridge above the settlement. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Everyone looked up. On the ridge stood at least a dozen Apache men, all armed. Benjamin Cross stood among them, along with Henry and several others Tommy recognized from their journey. "Benjamin," Tommy breathed in relief. Benjamin called down to the deputy. "I sent a telegram to the Territorial Marshal's office 3 days ago. Turns out they have no record of you being assigned to this area. In fact, the real marshal is quite interested in why someone's running around with a fake badge using his name." The deputy's face went pale. "This is none of your business." "It became my business when you decided to threaten innocent people," Benjamin replied. "Now here's how this is going to work. You and your men are going to ride out of here, And you're going to tell the Whitmores that their little game is over. One of the hired guns spat on the ground. There's 6 of us and only a dozen of you. Those aren't bad odds. Except you're also surrounded by armed settlers who don't take kindly to fake lawmen threatening their people, William said. Sure enough, more rifles appeared in windows and doorways around the settlement. And the real marshal will be here by tomorrow with actual authority to arrest anyone who commits crimes in this territory. The deputy looked around, calculating his odds. They weren't good. Slowly he holstered his gun. This isn't over, he said. The Whitmores have friends everywhere. You can't protect these 2 forever. We don't need to protect them forever, Tommy said, stepping forward with a thick envelope in his hand. We just need to protect them long enough for the truth to get out. He held up the envelope. This contains sworn statements from 36 people about what the Whitmores have done. Theft, intimidation, false imprisonment, attempted murder. We've got testimony from people they've hurt, people they've threatened, people who were too scared to speak up before. But they're not scared anymore, Catherine added. I've also written a detailed account of what Robert did to me. Every detail, every word he said, every action he took. And copies of this account are being sent to newspapers in 3 territories. The story of how a wealthy rancher's son tried to murder a woman for loving someone he disapproved of. Joseph spoke up, his voice steady. And I've written about how the Whitmores use their connections to manipulate relocation orders, to force Apache people off their land so they can grab it for themselves. How they pay officials to look the other way while they destroy families and communities. The deputy's face had gone from pale to ashen. You can't prove any of that. We can prove enough, Benjamin said. And once people start asking questions, once newspapers start investigating, the Whitmores are going to find their influence doesn't stretch as far as they think. One of the hired guns turned to the deputy. I didn't sign up for this. You said this was a simple collection job. Nobody said anything about fake badges or newspapers. Another gun nodded agreement. Whitmore's gold isn't worth getting hanged for impersonating a marshal. The deputy watched his support crumble. Finally, he wheeled his horse around. Fine, but you're making a mistake. People like the Whitmores don't go down easy. Neither do we, Catherine said firmly. The 6 riders left, kicking up dust as they retreated. As soon as they were gone, the settlement erupted in relieved chatter. Benjamin and his group came down from the ridge and Tommy clasped his friend's arm in gratitude. How did you know to come? Tommy asked. Henry got word that a fake marshal was asking questions in Veneta. We figured he was headed here, gathered up some friends and rode hard to beat him. Benjamin looked at Catherine and Joseph. You 2 have more supporters than you know. Word's been spreading about what the Whitmores did. People are angry. Over the next few days, more supporters arrived. People who'd been wronged by the Whitmore family. People who'd stayed silent out of fear but were ready to speak up now. A real territorial marshal came and took statements, his face growing darker with each account he heard. Catherine and Joseph worked together, organizing testimonies and evidence. They wrote letters to every newspaper they could think of, describing not just their own story, but the pattern of abuse and corruption the Whitmores represented. Even if they don't arrest Robert, Catherine said one evening as they worked by lamplight, even if his family's money protects him from jail, at least everyone will know what he is. At least the next person he tries to hurt will know to fight back. The first newspaper story appeared 2 weeks later. It wasn't everything they'd hoped for. The editor had been careful with accusations, but it was enough. The headline read, Questions arise about territorial power families. More stories followed. Each one chipped away at the Whitmore family's reputation. Robert tried to sue for libel, but that only brought more attention to the case. People came forward with their own stories. A pattern of abuse emerged that couldn't be ignored. The territorial marshal finally brought charges against Robert for false imprisonment and assault. It wasn't everything they wanted. His family's lawyers would likely get him a reduced sentence, but it was something. It was accountability. But the real victory came when the governor's office launched an investigation into corruption in the territorial marshal system. The fake badge the Whitmores had used led to a wider network of bribery and manipulation. Several officials resigned. Others were arrested. We did this, Joseph said one evening, looking at all the newspaper clippings they'd collected. We actually did this. We had help, Catherine reminded him. A lot of help. Benjamin, Henry, William, Tommy, everyone in Cedar Creek. They all risked something to stand with us. 6 months after the confrontation at Cedar Creek, Catherine and Joseph stood on a small piece of land in northern New Mexico territory. The view stretched out before them, mountains in the distance and wide open sky above. It was beautiful, peaceful, and most importantly, it was theirs. "This is it," Joseph said, squeezing Catherine's hand. "This is where we start over." They'd bought the land with money Catherine had saved, plus donations from supporters who'd followed their story in the newspapers. It wasn't much, just 20 acres with a creek running through it, but it was enough to build a life on. The wedding had taken place 2 months earlier in Cedar Creek, with the whole settlement in attendance. William Longfoot had performed the ceremony, blending Apache traditions with Christian ones at Catherine and Joseph's request. Catherine wore a simple dress she'd made herself, with beadwork that Joseph's mother had sent from across the territory. Joseph wore traditional Apache clothing, his hair long and proud. Tommy had stood as witness, along with Benjamin and Henry. There hadn't been any fancy decorations or expensive food, just people who genuinely cared about them celebrating their love. It was everything the wedding to Robert would have been, but real, honest, and filled with joy instead of obligation. Robert Whitmore had served 3 months in jail and paid a substantial fine. His family's reputation was damaged but not destroyed. He'd eventually be released and he'd likely go back to his comfortable life, but he'd never hold political office like he'd planned. That door was closed forever. The territorial investigation had resulted in 5 officials being removed from office and 2 others facing criminal charges. The Whitmore family's influence had been significantly reduced, though they were still wealthy and still had some power. "Do you think they'll ever come after us again?" Catherine asked as they watched the sun set over their new property. Joseph considered this. Maybe. Probably not physically, but they might try other ways. Spread rumors, cause trouble for my translation business. But we'll handle it when it comes. "Together," Catherine said. "Together," Joseph agreed. They'd decided that Joseph would continue his work as a translator, but expand it. There was growing demand for people who could bridge the communication gap between settlers and native communities. Joseph had a gift for helping both sides understand each other, and his reputation for fairness had spread. Catherine had discovered her own calling through the ordeal. She'd started writing, not just about their story, but about other women who'd been silenced or abused by powerful men. Her articles appeared in several territorial newspapers now, and she'd even been approached by a publisher in Santa Fe about writing a book. "Mrs. Catherine Redbird, the writer," Joseph said with a smile. "Who would have thought?" "I prefer Catherine Miller Redbird," she corrected with a grin. "I want to keep both names. Miller to honor where I came from, Redbird to honor where I'm going." They'd built a small cabin on the property with help from friends. Tommy had come for 3 weeks, bringing supplies in his strong back. Benjamin and Henry had visited too, along with several families from Cedar Creek. Even some Apache families Joseph had helped over the years showed up with gifts and offers of assistance. The cabin was simple but sturdy, with 2 rooms and a covered porch. Catherine had planted a garden, and Joseph was building a corral for the horses they planned to buy. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. One evening, about a month after they'd moved in, a wagon appeared on the road leading to their property. Catherine tensed, old fears rising, but Joseph recognized the driver. "It's your father," he said quietly. Catherine hadn't seen or heard from her father since before the kidnapping. She'd written to him twice after everything happened, but he'd never responded. She'd assumed he'd disowned her for the scandal, for choosing Joseph for everything. Her father climbed down from the wagon slowly, looking older than Catherine remembered. He stood there awkwardly, hat in his hands, not sure what to say. "Papa," Catherine said, her voice uncertain. "Catherine." He looked at her, then at Joseph, then back at her. "I read the stories in the newspapers. All of them. Every word you wrote. I'm sorry if they embarrassed you," Catherine started, but her father held up his hand. "Embarrassed me? Girl, you made me proud." His voice broke slightly. "And ashamed. Ashamed that I didn't protect you. Ashamed that I worked for a family that could do something so evil. Ashamed that I didn't believe you when you tried to tell me about Robert before." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "You tried to warn me about Robert? You told me he was controlling, that you didn't want to marry him. I told you to stop being foolish, that it was a good match." Her father's shoulders sagged. I was thinking about the money, the security, not about your happiness. I'm sorry, Catherine. I'm so sorry. Catherine ran to him then, and they held each other while both cried. Joseph stood back, giving them space, but his eyes were wet too. I quit working for the Whitmores, her father said when they finally pulled apart. The day I read your first article, I walked into Charles Whitmore's office and told him exactly what I thought of him and his son. Then I packed my things and left. What will you do? Catherine asked, worried. I got a job managing a small ranch about 40 miles from here. Honest work for honest people. He looked at Joseph. And I was hoping if you'll have me I could visit sometimes. Get to know my son-in-law properly. Make up for lost time. Joseph stepped forward and extended his hand. You're always welcome here, sir. Her father shook his hand firmly. Call me David, and thank you, both of you, for being braver than I ever was. He stayed for dinner and they talked until late into the night. He told them about how the community had reacted to the newspaper stories, how some people were angry at Catherine for causing trouble, but how many more were inspired by her courage. He brought news that 2 other women had come forward with their own stories of abuse by wealthy men, emboldened by Catherine's example. You started something, David said, something bigger than just your own story. After her father left, promising to visit again soon, Catherine and Joseph sat on their porch watching the stars. I keep thinking about those letters, Catherine said, the ones Robert made me burn. Sometimes I wish I could remember exactly what they said. I remember, Joseph said softly. Not every word, but the feeling of them. The hope in them. The promise of a future we didn't think we could have. And now we have it, Catherine said. Not the way we planned, not without scars, but we have it. The letters were just paper, Joseph reflected. Beautiful paper with beautiful words, but just paper. They burned. But what they represented, what they meant, that's still here. He touched his chest, then hers. In here. That's something no one can burn. Over the following months, their life found a rhythm. Joseph traveled for his translation work, sometimes gone for a week at a time, but he always came home to Catherine. She wrote her articles and tended the garden and slowly, carefully began to heal from the trauma of what had happened. Tommy visited often, becoming like a brother to them both. He'd joke that saving Catherine had been the best decision he'd ever made, even though it had turned his quiet life upside down. Quiet is overrated, he'd say. Sometimes doing the right thing means choosing noise over peace. Benjamin and Henry came too, bringing news from the Apache communities and updates on the territorial politics. The reforms that had started after Catherine's story broke were continuing. Things were changing slowly, but they were changing. Cedar Creek became a second home to them. They visited several times a year, always welcomed with open arms. William Longfoot became like a grandfather to them, sharing wisdom and stories, teaching them both about Apache traditions and history. One day, almost a year after the wedding, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. They'd talked about children, but bringing a child into a world that had been so cruel to them felt like an act of faith. What kind of world are we bringing a baby into? Catherine worried. A better one than the world we were born into, Joseph said, his hand on her stomach. Because we're fighting to make it better. Because people like William and Benjamin and Tommy are fighting. Because you're writing truth and I'm building bridges between people. Our child will grow up knowing that change is possible. And they'll grow up knowing they're loved, Catherine added. Knowing that love is worth fighting for no matter what. Their daughter was born the following spring, healthy and loud and perfect. They named her Hope because that's what she represented. Hope for the future, hope for healing, hope that love could triumph over hate. Catherine's father was there for the birth, and he cried when he held his granddaughter for the first time. Tommy brought gifts from half the territory, as word had spread about the baby. Even some of the Apache elders came to offer blessings for the child. As Catherine held Hope and watched Joseph singing softly to her in Apache, she thought about how far they'd come. From that abandoned house where she'd hung waiting to die, to this moment of pure joy. The letters were gone, burned to ash, but they'd been replaced by something better. A real life, messy and complicated and sometimes scary, but real. A life built on truth instead of lies, on courage instead of fear, on love that had been tested by fire and survived.